Hi, I'm Maya. I thought family meant support, belief, unconditional love. Instead, on my 26th birthday, my parents called me worthless and told me not to come back until I made something of myself. 4 years later, I sold my startup for $50 million and bought the house I was thrown out of. The look on their faces when I handed them the eviction notice was worth every sleepless night, every rejection, every moment of doubt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Seattle rain pelted against my windshield as I pulled into my parents' driveway. The wipers struggled against the November downpour, a rhythm matching my heartbeat. Nervous, erratic, too fast. The colonial-style house looked exactly as it always had. Immaculate lawn despite the season, freshly painted shutters, warm yellow light spilling from the windows. A picture-perfect family home that told nothing of the coldness inside. I checked, my reflection in the rearview mirror, tucking a strand of dark hair behind my ear. 26 today. I'd spent the morning dodging calls from my supervisor about the project I hadn't finished. The afternoon staring at my laptop trying to make progress on the app I'd been coding for months. And now the evening was reserved for the obligatory birthday dinner with Richard and Eleanor Chen, who measured success in promotions, degrees, and country club memberships. The small gift bag on my passenger seat held a bottle of my father's favorite whiskey, an olive branch, a peace offering. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight they'd see that although I wasn't the corporate lawyer or doctor they'd wanted, I was trying. The startup I was building might not be profitable yet, but it had potential. At least that's what I told myself on good days. I grabbed the gift and my umbrella, taking a deep breath before making a dash through the rain. The front door opened, before I could knock. My mother stood there, her slim figure blocking the entrance, arms crossed over her cashmere sweater. No hug, no happy birthday. Just a critical once-over that made me immediately regret the jeans and oversized sweater I'd thrown on. "You're late," she said, stepping aside. "Your father's been waiting to eat for 20 minutes. Sorry, traffic was terrible with the rain. I shook out my umbrella on the porch before stepping inside. The house smelled like roasted duck and ginger, my favorite childhood meal. A pang of hope flickered in my chest. My father sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, not bothering to look up as I entered. His silver-streaked hair was freshly cut, his button-down shirt pressed to perfection. "Hi, Dad," I said, setting the gift bag next to his plate. "Happy birthday to me, I guess." He glanced up, his expression as unchanging as the granite countertops. He'd splurged on last year. "Sit down, food's getting cold." I slid into my usual chair, the one facing the large family portrait from when I was 18. Valedictorian, Stanford-bound, the golden child. Before I'd switched majors from pre-med to computer science. Before I'd dropped out entirely to build something of my own. Before I'd become the family disappointment. "How's work?" my mother asked, serving the duck with mechanical precision. The same question, every dinner, always loaded. "It's going well, actually. The app is almost ready for beta testing. I've got a meeting with some angel investors next." "So still no real job," my father interrupted, finally looking at me. His eyes were sharp, assessing, finding me wanting. "Still playing around on computers while your classmates are making something of themselves." I pushed a piece of duck around my plate. "It's not playing, Dad. Tech startups are—" "Your cousin Jennifer just made junior partner at her firm," my mother interjected, as if I hadn't spoken. "And Michael is finishing his residency at Mass General. Top of his class." The familiar weight of comparison pressed down on my shoulders. Jennifer and Michael, the measuring sticks against which I would always fall short. "I know," I said, quietly. "That's great for them." My father took a long sip of water, his gaze never leaving my face. "And what exactly do you have to show for yourself at 26, Maya? A half-finished app no one will use? A resume gap that grows by the month? You live in that tiny apartment, driving that same beat-up car from college, burning through the trust fund your grandparents left you on some fantasy. I set my fork down, appetite vanishing. It's not a fantasy. The market research shows there's a real need for what I'm building. If you just look at the business plan, enough. He cut through my words like they were nothing. We've heard this before, for years now. Just a little more time, just a little more money. Meanwhile, you have nothing to show for yourself. Nothing. My mother reached for her wineglass, avoiding my eyes. Always the silent witness, never my defender. It's my birthday, I said softly, as if that might shield me from what was coming. My father's laugh was short, humorless. Yes, 26. Years we've invested in you, and what return have we seen? What achievements? What success? The words hit like physical blows. I'd been hearing variations of this speech for years, but something about tonight, maybe the rain, maybe the milestone, maybe the rejection email I'd received from yet another potential investor that morning, made it unbearable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I'm trying, I said, voice barely above a whisper. The startup world is competitive, but I'm getting closer. The algorithm is innovative. It could change how people connect with service providers. If it takes off. If, my father repeated, the word dripping with disdain. Always if. Never when. Never now. My mother finally spoke, her voice gentle, but no less cutting. Darling, we just worry. Your friends are buying homes, starting families, building careers. And you're… She gestured vaguely at me, as if my entire existence was too disappointing to articulate. I'm what? I challenged, a rare flare of defiance rising in me. Following my passion? Working 18-hour days to build something I believe in? Taking a risk instead of following the safe path you mapped out for me before I could even speak? The silence that followed was deafening. My father's expression hardened into something I recognized from my childhood, the look that preceded punishment. He reached beside him, lifting a folder I hadn't noticed, and slid it across the table toward me. Open it, he commanded. With trembling fingers, I flipped the folder open. Inside were bank statements, my bank statements, showing the dwindling balance of my savings. Beside them, a spreadsheet detailing every deposit my parents had made to my account over the past 3 years. Emergency rent coverage when a client payment fell through, the car repair last winter, the medical bill from my hospital stay after. I'd worked myself to exhaustion. What is this? I asked, though I already knew. The cost of your failure, my father said simply. Nearly $40,000 we've poured into your dream since you dropped out. Money that was supposed to be for your brother's college fund, for your mother's retirement comfort, for renovations to this house. I stared at the papers, shame and anger warring inside me. You offered that help. I never asked. We offered because we thought it was temporary. His fist came down on the table, rattling the plates. We thought eventually you'd come to your senses, get a real job, stop this childish fantasy. But you're 26 today, Maya. 26 and worthless by any measurable standard. The word hung in the air. Worthless. A simple adjective that somehow defined my entire existence in their eyes. Richard, my mother said softly, a token protest. He ignored her, eyes locked on mine. We're done. No more handouts. No more rescuing you from your poor decisions. Until you can show us something real, a job, an accomplishment, anything of value, don't come back to this house. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The rain pattered against the windows, the only sound in the suffocating silence. You're kicking me out? I finally managed. On my birthday? We're giving you motivation, my father corrected, as if this were some kind of tough love rather than total rejection. Sometimes birds need to be pushed from the nest. Clearly, we've made life too comfortable for you to feel the urgency of your situation. I looked to my mother, searching for any sign of disagreement, any flicker of the woman who used to bandage my scraped knees and whisper that I could be anything I wanted. Her eyes met mine briefly before sliding away, complicit in her silence. With mechanical movements, I gathered the papers, slipped them back into the folder. My body felt distant, disconnected, operating on autopilot while my mind struggled to process what was happening. So that's it? I asked, voice hollow. 26 years and I'm just cut off? Banished? Unless I conform to your definition of success? My father's expression didn't change. Until you demonstrate actual worth, yes. Worth, worthless. The words echoed in my head as I stood, legs unsteady beneath me. I didn't take the folder. Let them keep their accounting of my failures. I never asked to be measured by your yardstick, I said quietly. And someday, you'll regret this moment. My father's laugh followed me as I walked toward the door. Big words from someone who has never followed through on anything. I paused at the entryway, rain still drumming against the roof. The family portrait caught my eye one last time. That smiling girl with all the potential in the world, flanked by proud parents. A fiction, maybe. Or a memory so distant it might as well have been imagined. Happy birthday to me, I whispered, and stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked through my sweater before I reached my car, the umbrella forgotten in the hallway. I sat behind the wheel for long minutes, water dripping from my hair onto my jeans, creating dark spots that spread like bruises across the fabric. The house remained unchanged, warm light spilling from windows that no longer welcomed me. Inside, they were probably clearing the dishes, perhaps already calling Jennifer or Michael to commiserate about their disappointing daughter. The thought should have hurt. Instead, I felt strangely numb, as if a long infected wound had finally been lanced, painful but necessary. I started the engine, the old car sputtering before catching, a sound that had annoyed my father every time he heard it. Now it felt like a small act of defiance. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of my mother watching from the window, her figure blurred by rain and distance. She didn't wave. I didn't look back. The streets of the affluent suburb where I'd grown up seemed foreign now. Manicured lawns and luxury cars, suddenly symbols of a world I no longer belonged to. Perhaps never had. Each house I passed represented a version of success my parents would approve of, a life that would earn me the right to return to their dinner table. I drove without destination until I found myself parked outside the small co-working space where I'd rented a desk, the only place that felt remotely like mine anymore. At nearly 9 on a Friday night, the converted warehouse was mostly empty. Just a few other dreamers hunched over laptops, nursing cold coffee and ambitions that wouldn't wait for daylight. My desk was in the corner, adorned only with a small plant that had survived against all odds and a stack of notebooks filled with code and sketches. I dropped into my chair, still damp from the rain, and stared at the black screen of my monitor. Worthless. The word had weight, substance, a physical presence that pressed against my chest until breathing became difficult. I'd heard variations of it throughout my life, not living up to your potential. Wasting your talents, throwing away opportunities, but never so nakedly, so finally. I powered on the computer, the blue light washing over my face as I navigated to my project files. Connect Me, I'd named it, an algorithm that matched people with local service providers based on more than just ratings and availability. It analyzed communication styles, preferences, work patterns, creating more successful client-provider relationships. 3 years of work, of learning to code better than anyone thought I could, of market research conducted on a shoestring budget, of pitch decks and rejection emails. Worthless? Maybe. Probably, by my parents' standards. But it was mine. I opened the latest investor rejection email, reading it again more carefully now that the initial sting had faded. While your concept shows promise, we don't feel the team has the experience necessary to execute at scale. Team. That was the sticking point. I was solo, a one-woman operation trying to compete with startups that had co-founders with complementary skills, with networks, with pedigrees that opened doors mine couldn't. I pulled up my contact list, former classmates, people I'd met at hackathons and conferences, names collected but never leveraged because I'd been trying to prove I could do it alone. Pride, stubbornness, fear of rejection, whatever the reason, it had cost me precious time. Without allowing myself to reconsider, I began drafting emails. To Raj, the UI/UX designer who'd once expressed interest in what I was building. To Zoe, whose business development experience could translate user problems into marketable solutions. To Marcus, whose network in venture capital circles was extensive, even if his technical knowledge wasn't. Each message was direct, honest, vulnerable in a way I'd never allowed myself to be. I'm looking for partners, not employees. Equal equity, equal voice. Here's what I've built so far. Here's where I believe it can go. Here's why I can't get there alone. I sent them before I could second-guess myself, then leaned back in my chair, exhaustion finally catching up to me. The co-working space had emptied out entirely, the overhead lights dimmed to their nighttime setting. My phone showed no missed calls, no concerned texts asking if I'd made it home safely. Of course not. I'd been cut off, excised, deemed worthless until proven otherwise. I should have felt devastated. Instead, as the initial shock receded, something else took its place. A clarity I hadn't experienced in years. My parents had always been the safety net I both resented and relied on, the critics whose approval I sought even while chafing under their expectations. Now that net was gone, their opinion irrelevant by their own decree. For the first time, truly, failure or success would be entirely mine. I opened my code editor and began to work, fingers flying across the keyboard as if possessed. The algorithm needed refinement, the user interface simplification. If I was going to bring on partners, convince them to gamble their time and talents on my vision, everything needed to be sharper, clearer, more compelling. Hours blurred together. Somewhere around 3 a.m, I curled up on the small couch in the break room, using my still damp sweater as a makeshift pillow. I dreamed of rain and dimly lit dinner tables and doors closing in my face. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of fresh coffee. Zoe stood over me, 2 paper cups in hand, her curly hair pulled back in a messy bun, eyes curious behind round glasses. "Your email said urgent," she said, extending one of the cups toward me. I figured that meant I shouldn't wait for business. Hours. I sat up, disoriented, trying to smooth my rumpled clothes and tangled hair. "You came." She shrugged, settling into a chair across from me. "You've been building something interesting in your corner for years, never asking for help, never sharing the load. Then suddenly at midnight you send an email offering equal partnership? Yeah, I came." She took a sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim. "You look like hell, by the way. Happy birthday." I blinked in surprise. "How did you know it was my birthday?" "Facebook, like a normal person." She gestured toward my makeshift bed. "Want to tell me why you're sleeping at the office on your birthday instead of celebrating?" The events of the previous night came rushing back. My father's cold assessment, my mother's silent complicity, the word that had shattered whatever illusions I still harbored about my place in their world. "My parents kicked me out," I said flatly, "called me worthless, cut me off financially, told me not to come back until I've made something of myself." Zoe's expression didn't change. No pity, no shock, just quiet assessment. And your response to that was to finally reach out for help with Connect Me? Interesting coping mechanism. A surprised laugh escaped me, the first genuine one in longer than I could remember. I guess so. She set her coffee down, leaning forward. Show me what you've got so far. The real version, not the polished pitch deck you've been shopping around. For the next 2 hours, I walked her through everything. The code, the user research, the technical challenges, the market opportunity. She asked sharp questions, pointed out flaws I'd been blind to, suggested pivots I hadn't considered. By the time Raj arrived, responding to my email with curiosity rather than commitment, Zoe and I were deep in discussion about revamping the entire onboarding process. Raj brought his design sensibilities and brutal honesty. By afternoon, Marcus had joined us, skeptical but intrigued, his connections potentially opening doors that had remained firmly closed to me alone. We worked through the weekend, sleeping in shifts on the break room couch, surviving on delivered food and convenience store snacks. By Monday morning, Connect Me had been transformed, streamlined, strengthened, supported by a team rather than a solo dreamer. As sunlight filled the co-working space once again, I looked around at these near strangers who had jumped into my vision with both feet, who had seen value where my own parents had seen only waste. "Why did you come?" I asked them, the question that had been nagging at me since Zoe appeared with coffee. Why bet on someone who's been labeled worthless? Marcus laughed, stretching his long legs under the conference table. Because worthless is just another word for undervalued asset. Any decent investor knows that. Raj nodded in agreement. And because we've all been there, the kid who disappointed, who chose the road less obvious. Some of us just had parents who eventually came around. Zoe's answer was simpler. Because the code was good, Maya, really good. And good code doesn't come from worthless people. A lump formed in my throat, gratitude mixing with determination. These people had seen my worth when those who should have believed in me most had seen nothing. So, I said, gathering myself, are we doing this? For real? Equal partners? 3 heads nodded, 3 expressions showing varying degrees of excitement and apprehension. We were far from guaranteed success. The odds against any startup were astronomical, but for the first time, I wasn't facing those odds alone. That night, I found an apartment listing on the edge of the city, a tiny studio above a coffee shop, rent just within what I could afford if I cut everything else to the bone. I signed the lease the next day, moving in with nothing but clothes, my computer, and a new resolution burning in my chest. Someday, I promised myself as I laid on a borrowed air mattress in my empty new home, I would buy my parents' house, not to live in, but to own the place that had witnessed my supposed worthlessness. I would own it, and then I would stand in that dining room where my father had delivered his verdict, and I would know that I had become something even by his impossible standards. It was a petty dream, perhaps, small and vindictive in a way I had never allowed myself to be. But it was mine, and on that first night of true independence, it kept me warm in a way thoughts of algorithms and market share couldn't. "Watch me," I whispered to the empty room, a promise to myself and a challenge to the parents who weren't there to hear it. Just watch me. The next 3 months passed in a blur of caffeine, code, and camaraderie. Our tiny team worked out of the co-working space, transforming Connect Me from my solo project into our collective vision. We pivoted slightly, focusing on connecting homeowners with service providers using our proprietary matching algorithm. The days blended together, starting before sunrise and ending long after midnight, fueled by determination and the quiet knowledge that I had nowhere to go but forward. December arrived with bitter winds and holiday decorations that made the city sparkle despite the cold. I hadn't spoken to my parents since that birthday dinner. No calls, no texts, not even the obligatory Thanksgiving invitation that had always come regardless of family tension. Their silence was a wound that scabbed over with each passing day, still tender, but no longer bleeding. I stood at the window of our newly rented office space, a step up from the co-working desks, though still in a less than prestigious building with temperamental heating and water stains on the ceiling. Outside, snow flurries danced in the glow of streetlights, the early darkness of winter settling over Seattle. Behind me, Zoe and Raj argued good-naturedly over user interface designs, while Marcus paced, deep in a phone call with a potential investor. "No, we're not interested in changing the revenue model," he was saying, voice firm despite the opportunity on the line. "The subscription service ensures quality providers and sustainable growth." A pause. "I understand your concerns, but we've run the numbers. This works." I turned from the window, watching my team, my partners, fight for our vision. 3 months ago, I'd been alone in this battle, carrying the weight of creation and rejection on my shoulders. Now, the burden was shared, the vision stronger for having multiple perspectives shaping it. "Fine," Marcus said finally, hanging up. "They're passing. Too conservative to see the long game." My stomach clenched. Another no. We'd heard plenty. Since forming the partnership, each one a little easier to bear than when I'd faced them alone, but still painful. Our runway was getting shorter. The combined resources we'd pooled would last another 4 months at our current burn rate. After that... "Their loss," Zoe said, not looking up from her laptop. "The Matthews meeting tomorrow is more promising anyway. They actually understand the service economy." I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "We only need one yes." "Preferably a yes with 7 figures attached," Raj quipped, stretching his arms overhead. "My ramen diet is getting old." We laughed, the tension breaking. We were all living on financial fumes, having committed fully to Connect Me. Raj had quit his design job at a respected agency. Zoe had walked away from a product management role that paid 6 figures. Marcus had put his consulting business on hold. All for this shared dream, this algorithm I'd started coding in my bedroom during sleepless nights when my parents' expectations felt like physical weights on my chest. I picked up my coat, shrugging it on. "I'm going to pick up dinner. The usual?" Collective nods as they returned to work. I stepped out into the biting cold, grateful for the moment alone. Leadership was new to me. I'd always been the quiet coder in the corner, the one with ideas but not necessarily the voice to champion them. Now 3 brilliant people were following me into potential financial ruin, believing in something I'd created. The responsibility was terrifying, exhilarating, nothing my parents had prepared me for. I walked to the Thai place around the corner, hands shoved deep in my pockets, mind churning with the pitch deck for tomorrow's meeting. As I waited for our order, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your mother misses you. Pride shouldn't keep family apart during holidays. Call her." My Aunt Susan, undoubtedly. The family mediator, the one who smoothed ruffled feathers at reunions and made sure everyone showed up for Chinese New Year celebrations. I stared at the message, a familiar cocktail of guilt and resentment brewing in my chest. Did my mother miss me? She hadn't said a word that night as my father labeled me worthless, hadn't reached out once in the months since. Her silence had been its own verdict. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on nothing at all. What was there to say? That I missed them too, despite everything? That I was building something that might someday make them proud if they could see beyond their narrow definition of success. That some nights I still cried myself to sleep, mourning the unconditional love I'd never truly had. None of it would change anything. My parents had made their position clear. I wouldn't be welcome until I met their standards, until I could prove my worth in terms they recognized. The food arrived, breaking my spiral. I paid and headed back to the office, the warm bags a sharp contrast to the December chill. When I pushed through the door, I found my team huddled around Marcus's laptop, expressions tight with concentration. "What's happening?" I asked, setting the food on our makeshift break table. Marcus looked up, eyes serious. TechMatch just announced a service platform for connecting homeowners with contractors. Uses AI matching, launching in beta next month. My blood went cold. TechMatch was a major player, well-funded and connected. If they were entering our space. "Show me," I said, dropping my coat on a chair and moving to see the screen. The announcement was sleek, professional, backed by the kind of marketing budget we could only dream of. Their concept mirrored ours in broad strokes, matching service providers to homeowners based on compatibility rather than just ratings, but lacked the nuance of our algorithm, the depth of our matching criteria. "It's surface level," Raj noted, echoing my thoughts. "Fancy AI buzzwords without the sophisticated architecture we've built." "But they have brand recognition and funding," Zoe countered. "They could launch an inferior product and still dominate." Marcus closed the laptop with a decisive click. "This changes our timeline. We need to launch the beta immediately, establish ourselves before they gain traction." "We're not ready," I said automatically. "The backend needs optimization. The provider onboarding flow still has bugs. Maya." Zoe's voice cut through my spiral. "Perfect is the enemy of launched. We can iterate after we're live." I looked at their faces, determined, concerned, but not defeated. They were right. We couldn't afford to polish endlessly while competitors moved into our space. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it. Full sprint to launch. 2 weeks." We ate our Thai food while outlining an accelerated timeline, reassigning priorities, identifying the minimum viable product we could release. The air hummed with a new urgency, a sense that the comfortable obscurity of development was ending. Soon we would exist in the real world, our creation open to public judgment and comparison. As the night deepened, my team gradually dispersed. First Raj to his girlfriend's apartment across town, then Marcus to his family waiting in the suburbs. Zoe lingered, helping me clean up the remnants of dinner. "You're thinking about your parents," she said, "not a question but a statement of fact." I looked up, startled by her perception. "How did you know?" She shrugged, tossing a container into the recycling bin. "You get this look when something reminds you of them. Like you're bracing for a blow that never quite lands." The description was so accurate it made me flinch. My aunt texted, "Holiday guilt trip." Zoe leaned against the break table, studying me. "You know, I ran into a similar situation with my dad when I left corporate to join startups. He thought I was throwing away security for pipe dreams." "What happened?" "He cut me off financially, told me I was making a huge mistake." She smiled slightly. 2 years later, when my first company sold to Google, he acted like he'd supported me all along. Selective memory is a powerful thing. I crushed an empty sauce packet in my palm. My parents won't be so easily impressed. They measure success in credentials, titles, stability. Even if Connect Me succeeds wildly, they'll see it as lucky rather than earned. "Maybe," Zoe agreed. "Or maybe they'll surprise you. Either way, you're not building this for them." The truth in her words resonated in my chest. I wasn't building Connect Me to prove my parents wrong. At least, that hadn't been the original motivation. I was building it because I believed in the concept, in the problem we were solving, in the team we'd assembled. But a small, wounded part of me still imagined the moment I could walk back into that house, successful by any measure, and see recognition in my father's eyes. That fantasy sustained me through the darkest moments of doubt. "Get some sleep," Zoe said, grabbing her coat. "Tomorrow's investor meeting is early." After she left, I stayed in the quiet office, making final tweaks to our pitch deck. Around midnight, curiosity got the better of me. I opened a private browser window and navigated to my father's company website, something I'd avoided doing since that fateful birthday dinner. There he was, Richard Chen, Executive Vice President, his professional headshot showing the same stern confidence I'd grown up measuring myself against. The company had expanded, adding new regional offices according to the press releases, my father's influence growing, his success compounding on itself, like always. Before I could stop myself, I clicked through to my mother's social media profiles. Eleanor Chen's carefully curated life continued uninterrupted. Charity galas, garden, club meetings, dinner parties with the same circle of affluent friends. No indication that a daughter was missing from the picture, no visible hole in the fabric of their perfect existence. I closed the browser, a heaviness settling in my chest. They had moved on effortlessly, their lives unmarked by my absence. While I carried the weight of their rejection daily, they appeared unburdened by the memory of the night they'd called their only daughter worthless. I wiped away unexpected tears, angry at myself for still caring, for still hoping that somewhere, beneath their disappointment was love. Enough love to miss me, to wonder how I was doing, to hope I was okay. The next morning arrived too quickly, gray Seattle light filtering through the office blinds where I'd fallen asleep at my desk. I changed into the one presentable outfit. I kept at the office for meetings, applied concealer to the dark circles under my eyes, and met my team at the investor's downtown office. Matthews Ventures occupied the 37th floor of a gleaming tower, the kind of space my father would approve of. All steel, glass, and quiet money. We were escorted to a conference room with sweeping views of Puget Sound, where 5 partners waited, expressions professionally neutral as we set up our presentation. I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety as I prepared to speak, the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my father's whispering that I wasn't good enough. Polished. Enough, worthy enough to stand in this room. I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the facts, the metrics, the promise of what we'd built. Connect Me isn't just another service platform, I began, voice steadier than I felt. It's a relationship engine. While our competitors focus on ratings and availability, we're measuring compatibility, the human factors that determine whether a homeowner and service provider will work well together. For the next 30 minutes, we presented our vision, our progress, our go-to-market strategy. The partners asked pointed questions about scalability, about competition, including TechMatch's recent announcement, about our monetization plans. Marcus fielded the financial projections with practiced ease. Zoe highlighted our user research and market analysis. Raj demonstrated the elegant simplicity of our interface, and I walked them through the proprietary algorithm that made it all possible, the pattern-matching code that could predict successful service relationships with remarkable accuracy. When we finished, the lead partner, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes, leaned forward. "Your technology is impressive," she said carefully. "Your team is clearly talented. But you're entering a crowded space, with established players and deep-pocketed newcomers. What makes you believe you can capture meaningful market share?" It was the question we'd prepared for, the one that had kept us up nights strategizing. Zoe started to answer with our rehearsed response about first-mover advantage in our specific niche, but something made me interrupt. "Because we understand the fundamental problem better than anyone else," I said, moving away from the slide deck to speak directly to the partners. "This isn't about finding a plumber or electrician quickly. It's about finding the right plumber, the right electrician, someone who communicates the way you prefer, who approaches problems the way you value, who fits your expectations of professionalism." I thought of my father, how he hired and fired service providers based not on their technical skills but on intangibles, whether they looked him in the eye, whether they offered solutions rather than excuses, whether they anticipated his unstated expectations. "People don't just want services performed," I continued, warming to the unscripted explanation. They want them performed by someone they trust, someone they connect with. Our algorithm understands that human element in a way no one else has captured. That's our advantage. The room was silent when I finished, 5 pairs of eyes assessing me with new interest. The lead partner glanced at her colleagues, some unspoken communication passing between them. "We'll need to review your technical documentation more thoroughly," she said finally, "and we'd want exclusive terms for this funding round." My heart skipped. This wasn't a no. This wasn't even a maybe. This was the beginning of actual negotiation. Marcus stepped in smoothly, and for the next hour, we discussed terms, figures, timelines. When we finally left the building, stepping into the pale winter sunshine, a stunned silence held us for several blocks. "They're going to fund us," Raj said finally, disbelief coloring his voice. $6 million. They're actually going to fund us. "Don't celebrate yet," Marcus cautioned, ever the pragmatist. "Term sheets can fall apart. Due diligence could uncover issues. It's not final until—" "Oh, shut up and be happy for 5 minutes," Zoe interrupted, linking her arm through his. "We just got a term sheet from one of the most respected venture firms in the city. That's a win." It was a win, a significant one. The kind that would extend our runway, fund our official launch, give us breathing room to grow and adapt. The kind of win that might, just might, begin to prove my worth by the very standards my parents had used to dismiss me. That night, as my partners celebrated over drinks I couldn't afford, I sat alone in my tiny apartment, staring at my phone. The desire to call my parents, to tell them about the investor meeting, was nearly overwhelming. Not for their approval, I told myself, but simply to share news that any parent would want to hear. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed an email to my father's professional address. Connect Me, the startup I founded, received a term sheet for $6 million in Series A funding today from Matthews Ventures. Launch scheduled for February. Thought you might be interested. I hit send before I could reconsider, then closed my laptop, exhaling slowly. It wasn't an olive branch, not exactly. More a status update, proof of life, evidence of progress. I didn't expect a response. But the next morning, there it was in my inbox. 2 sentences, coldly professional. "Congratulations on your funding. Round. Keep us informed of your progress." No warmth, no personal touch, no indication that I was anything more than a distant business acquaintance. But it was contact, the first acknowledgement of my existence since that October night when I'd walked out of their house. I read the message repeatedly during our accelerated launch preparations, trying to decipher hidden meanings in those 12 words. Was the us significant? Had my mother seen the email? Was this my father's way of leaving a door slightly ajar? I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like either groveling or gloating. Instead, I channeled my complicated emotions into Connect Me, working punishing hours to prepare for our launch, while the lawyers finalized our funding agreement with Matthews Ventures. January faded into February. Seattle's gray skies occasionally broke for teasing glimpses of spring sunshine. Our office expanded to accommodate new hires, developers to strengthen the back end, marketing specialists to plan our launch campaign, customer service representatives to handle the anticipated influx of users. The night before launch, I stood, alone in the office after everyone had gone home. Our logo, a stylized handshake formed from interlocking C and M, now adorned the wall, professionally mounted rather than taped up as it had been in our early days. Desks filled the once empty space, equipment hummed, whiteboards displayed complex workflow diagrams and sprint plans. We had built this, the 4 of us, from nothing but an idea and stubborn determination. Tomorrow it would exist in the world, flawed, unfinished in many ways, but real. Accessible to anyone with the app or website. Judged by the harshest critics. Of all, actual users with actual needs. I touched the business card on my desk, still warm from the printer. Maya Chen, founder and CEO. A title that had seemed presumptuous when we'd first ordered the cards, now made official by investment dollars and incorporation papers. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Sleep tonight, history tomorrow. I smiled, tucking the card into my wallet. Whatever happened with the launch, success, failure, or the messy reality that usually fell somewhere between, I had already proven something essential to myself. I wasn't worthless. I was a founder, a creator, a leader who had convinced others to follow her vision. I had value, regardless of whether Richard and Eleanor Chen ever recognized it. That certainty carried me through the launch day chaos, the server issues, the bug reports, the unexpected surge of users from a tech blog mention. It sustained me through the weeks that followed, as we iterated rapidly based on feedback, staying just ahead of TechMatch's competing product. By April, ConnectMe had 20,000 users across 3 cities. By June, we'd expanded to 12 cities and crossed the 50,000 user threshold. Our matching algorithm was proving remarkably accurate, with provider-client satisfaction rates far exceeding industry averages. Investors were noticing. TechCrunch featured us in a comparison piece that favored our approach over TechMatch's more superficial matching criteria. Service providers were signing up faster than we could process their applications, drawn by our higher job completion rates and the promise of clients who truly fit their working styles. On a warm July evening, I received an email from a name that made my heart stutter. Eleanor Chen. Maya, your father and I saw the article about ConnectMe in the Seattle Times business section. The house feels empty without you. Perhaps it's time to talk. Mother. I stared at the message, emotions colliding like storm fronts. 8 months of silence, broken not when I was struggling, not when I might have needed parental support, but now, when public validation had made me successful, in a way they could understand and claim proximity to. The house that had ejected me now supposedly felt empty. The parents who had called me worthless now wanted to talk, now that my worth had been established by metrics they respected. Press coverage, investor backing, market growth. I closed the email without responding, a calm certainty settling over me. I would talk to them eventually, but on my terms, not theirs. When I was ready, not when it was convenient for their narrative. For now, I had a company to build, a vision to realize, a future to create that had nothing to do with earning back the love that should have been unconditional from the start. The thought I'd had that first night in my empty studio apartment returned, no longer fueled by spite, but by a serene determination. Someday, I would buy their house. Not to return to it, but to own the space that had once defined and then rejected me. To transform it from a site of pain into a symbol of how far I'd come. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation of my story, my worth, my power to define myself beyond their limited vision. That night, I added a new goal to the company roadmap, visible only to me. Acquire the house, 2026. A personal milestone among the business objectives, a private finish line beyond the public race. ConnectMe would need to do more than survive. It would need to thrive, to grow exponentially, to exit at a valuation that would make such a purchase possible. A challenging goal, perhaps even an unlikely one given the brutal statistics of startup success. But I had already beaten longer odds. I had already proven the most important critics wrong. What was one more impossible achievement? 18 months. After launch, ConnectMe hit a milestone I had once thought impossible. 1 million registered users across 42 cities. Our algorithm had proven itself remarkably accurate, with satisfaction rates that left competitors scrambling to reverse engineer our approach. TechMatch, which had initially seemed like such a threat, was struggling to gain traction against our more sophisticated matching system. Their surface-level AI couldn't compete with the years of research and refinement we'd poured into our code. I stood at the window of our new headquarters, a full floor in a downtown Seattle tower with views of Elliott Bay. Behind me, the celebration was in full swing. Champagne flowing, music playing, team members who had grown from our original 4 to nearly 60 laughing and congratulating each other. The million-user milestone wasn't just a vanity metric. It had triggered clauses in our contracts that unlocked additional funding and partnership opportunities. "Not bad for someone worthless," Zoe said quietly, appearing at my side with 2 champagne flutes. She handed me one, following my gaze to the sunset painting the water gold and crimson. I smiled, accepting the glass. I haven't thought of myself as worthless in a long time. It was true. The label my father had placed on me that birthday night had lost its sting, faded by success and the unwavering belief of the people who had joined our mission. I still carried the wound of my parents' rejection, but it no longer defined me. "Your mother emailed again," Zoe noted, sipping her champagne. As my COO and closest friend, she was one of the few people who knew the full story of my estrangement. "3rd time this month." I nodded. Eleanor's campaign to re-establish contact had intensified as ConnectMe's public profile grew. What had begun as tentative emails had evolved into more direct overtures: birthday cards, holiday greetings, even a feature article about me from the business section of the Seattle Times, mailed to our office with a handwritten note. "So proud of you, Mom." I hadn't responded to any of it. Not out of spite, but because I still wasn't sure what I wanted from that relationship, if anything. The parents who had dismissed me so completely now wanted back into my life, but only after I'd proven my worth by external metrics. It felt conditional, calculated, a validation that came too late and for the wrong reasons. "You can't avoid them forever," Zoe said gently, especially not with the fortune profile coming out next month. The reminder sent a nervous flutter through my stomach. Fortune magazine was running a feature on women tech founders, and I'd been selected as one of their spotlights. The interview had been exhaustive, covering my background, education, and the founding story of ConnectMe. I'd been careful about what I shared regarding my family, but the article would inevitably raise my profile further. "I know," I admitted. "I'm just not ready yet." Marcus approached, champagne bottle in hand, his typically serious expression relaxed into a rare grin. "Hiding from your adoring public, fearless leader," I laughed, allowing him to top off my glass. "Just catching my breath. Big day." "And about to get bigger," he said, his grin widening. "Sarah Matthews just called. Capital X wants to meet. They're interested in leading our Series B." My eyebrows shot up. Capital X was a top-tier venture capital firm known for propelling promising startups into the stratosphere. Their involvement would take ConnectMe to an entirely new level. "When?" I asked, already mentally preparing for the pitch. "Next week. They're fast-tracking us." Marcus raised his glass. "To the next chapter." We clinked glasses, the moment heavy with possibility. The next chapter indeed, one that could potentially accelerate my timeline for all goals, personal and professional. Later that night, after the celebration wound down, I remained in my office, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. The email from my mother sat in my inbox, subject line reading simply, "We miss you." With a deep breath, I opened it. "Maya, your father and I would like to have dinner with you. Your choice of restaurant, your choice of time. We've seen your success with ConnectMe, and we want to celebrate with you. You've proven us wrong, and we're ready to admit it. Please give us a chance to make amends. Love, Mom." The words blurred as unexpected tears filled my eyes. All this time, this was what I'd wanted, an acknowledgement that they had been wrong, that I had value beyond their narrow definition of success. Yet now that it was offered, it felt hollow, transactional. They were willing to celebrate me, now that I was successful by conventional standards. now that others validated my worth with investment dollars and press coverage? Would they have reached out if Connect Me had failed? If I were still struggling in that tiny studio apartment, coding alone through sleepless nights? The answer was painfully obvious. Still, a part of me, the daughter who had once desperately sought their approval, wanted to accept. To sit across from them at some expensive restaurant and hear them say the words, "We were wrong. You are worthwhile. We're proud of you." I closed the laptop without responding, emotion giving way to clarity. I would meet with them eventually, but not yet. Not until I could do so from a position of complete emotional independence, when their approval or disapproval would mean nothing to my sense of self. The capital X meeting the following week exceeded all expectations. In a sleek conference room overlooking San Francisco's financial district, Zoe, Marcus, Raj, and I presented our vision for Connect Me's future: expansion into commercial services, international markets, specialized niches beyond home services. The partners, initially reserved, grew increasingly engaged as we walked them through our metrics, our technology roadmap, our competitive moat. By the time we concluded the presentation, the energy in the room had shifted palpably. "We've been watching Connect Me since your Series A," said David Rosenthal, the lead partner, leaning forward in his chair. "Your growth curve is impressive, but what really caught our attention is your retention rates. Both users and service providers stay with your platform at nearly twice the industry average. That suggests you've solved a fundamental problem in the marketplace." I nodded, pride warming my chest. Our matching algorithm creates better experiences for everyone involved. Better experiences lead to loyalty. "We'd like to lead your Series B," he continued without preamble. $50 million, with an option for an additional 20 based on performance triggers over the next year. The figure nearly made me gasp. It was substantially more than we'd been hoping for, enough to fuel aggressive expansion without diluting our equity position too severely. Marcus, ever the negotiator, kept his expression neutral. "We're speaking with several firms. What does Capital X bring besides capital?" What followed was a detailed discussion of the firm's strategic advantages: their network, their operational support, their experience scaling companies through the challenging middle stages of growth. By the time we left the building, we had a handshake agreement with term sheets to follow within days. On the flight back to Seattle, while my team celebrated quietly in the main cabin, I sat alone in my upgraded seat, a small luxury I'd recently allowed myself, staring out at clouds, burnished gold by the setting sun. $50 million. When the deal closed, Connect Me would be valued at over $200 million. My ownership stake, even after dilution, would make me wealthy by any standard. Wealthy enough to buy my parents' house, should I choose to. The thought sent a strange thrill through me. Not vindictive anymore, but something more complex. A completion of a circle, perhaps. A reclaiming of space that had once rejected me. I pulled out my phone, navigating to real estate listings for my parents' neighborhood. Property values had increased substantially since my childhood. Homes now selling for millions rather than hundreds of thousands. My parents had purchased well before the boom. The house that had felt so imposing to me as a child was likely worth $3 to $4 million now. A significant sum, but within reach if Connect Me continued its trajectory. If we hit our growth targets, if the marketplace responded to our expansion as projected, if we navigated the inevitable challenges of scaling, the exit could potentially value the company at $1 billion or more within 3 to 5 years. I smiled at my reflection in the darkened window. The shy, uncertain girl who had been deemed worthless was now calculating the timeline to become a billionaire. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Series B funding closed 2 months later, accompanied by press coverage that catapulted Connect Me into wider public awareness. The Fortune profile hit newsstands the same week, featuring me on the list of 40 under 40 tech leaders to watch. The photograph showed me standing in our Seattle office, the city skyline behind me, expression confident but thoughtful. The article detailed ConnectMe's rise, my background at Stanford, and my vision for transforming service relationships through technology. It mentioned my parents only briefly. Chen, the daughter of a corporate executive and a former concert pianist, credits her drive partly to her family's high expectations. A diplomatic half-truth. The reporter had asked about my relationship with my parents, and I'd deflected, unwilling to air private pain in public. Some stories weren't meant for magazine profiles. The day after the issue hit newsstands, a bouquet arrived at my office. Elegant white lilies and orchids, my mother's favorites rather than mine. The card read simply, "We've always been proud. Dinner soon, Mom and Dad." I placed the flowers on my assistant's desk, keeping only the card, which I tucked into my wallet next to the business card I'd printed after our first funding round. Two artifacts from different chapters of my story, physical reminders of how far I'd come. That evening, I finally replied to my mother's email. "Thank you for the flowers. I'm traveling extensively for the next few months with our expansion. We'll be in touch when my schedule allows." Polite, non-committal, professional. The kind of response my father would give to a business associate seeking a meeting he wasn't particularly interested in. I hit send before I could reconsider, then turned my attention to the expansion plans that would consume the coming year. ConnectMe's growth accelerated beyond even our optimistic projections. We launched in London and Toronto, our first international markets, with surprisingly strong adoption. Our engineering team doubled, then tripled, occupying 2 full floors of our building. Features that had been on our someday roadmap became reality. A specialized version for commercial properties, enhanced AI capabilities that improved matching accuracy even further, integrated payment and scheduling systems that streamlined the entire service experience. Through it all, I maintained a careful distance from my parents. They continued reaching out. Birthday wishes, holiday greetings, congratulatory notes when ConnectMe hit the news. I responded minimally, civilly, never closing the door entirely, but never opening it wide enough for a true reunion. The truth was, I no longer needed their approval. The wounded girl who had driven away from their house in the rain had been transformed, not just by success, but by the journey of building something meaningful, of leading a team who believed in my vision, of proving my value through creation rather than credentials. 2 years after our Series B, on a crisp autumn morning that reminded me painfully of the night I'd been ejected from my parents' lives, I received a call from Rosenthal at Capital X. "Maya, how quickly can you get to San Francisco?" Living Spaces wants to talk acquisition. My heart skipped. Living Spaces was a publicly traded company, a major player in the home services and real estate ecosystem. They had been making overtures for months, testing the waters of our interest in acquisition. But we'd consistently deflected, focusing on independent growth. "They're serious this time," Rosenthal continued. "They're prepared to make an offer that I think warrants serious consideration." 24 hours later, I sat in Living Spaces headquarters across from their CEO, Adam Winters, a man whose reputation for strategic acquisitions was legendary in the industry. Flanked by Zoe and Cy. Marcus, with our attorneys present, I listened as he outlined his vision for integrating ConnectMe into the Living Spaces ecosystem. "Your matching technology is the missing piece in our service platform," he explained, his enthusiasm genuine. "We've tried to build something comparable internally, but frankly, you're years ahead of us. Rather than compete, we want to incorporate your innovation into our existing infrastructure, giving you the scale and resources to expand globally." The offer he presented was staggering: $850 million, a combination of cash and stock, with retention packages for key team members, including the founding team. My share, after accounting for investor stakes and employee options, would be approximately $210 million. More than enough to buy my parents' house 50 times over. We didn't accept immediately. Due diligence would take months, and there were serious considerations about integration, autonomy, and the future of our team. But as I flew back to Seattle that evening, I knew in my heart that this was the right next chapter for Connect Me. We had built something valuable enough that one of the largest companies in our space wanted to own it. We had created real worth. The acquisition process consumed the next 4 months. Endless meetings, document reviews, negotiations over terms and conditions. Through it all, I maintained the same focused determination that had carried me from that birthday night to this culmination. When the final papers were signed in a sterile conference room in early spring, applause broke out among the attorneys and executives present. Champagne appeared, toasts were made, congratulations offered. I smiled and nodded through it all, feeling strangely detached from the celebration, my mind already turning to what would come next. That night, alone in my condo overlooking Lake Union, I opened my laptop and navigated to a real estate website I'd been monitoring for years. My parents' address, entered from memory, revealed what I'd been waiting for: a coming soon listing. After 30 years in the same house, Richard and Eleanor Chen were selling their home. The timing felt almost mystical, the house becoming available just as I acquired the means to purchase it. The listing price was $4, $2 million, a substantial sum for the neighborhood but unsurprising given the market. The photos showed rooms I remembered intimately: the formal dining room where I'd been labeled worthless, the kitchen where silent dinners had stretched into infinity, the living room, with its family portrait of a daughter who no longer existed. Without allowing myself to reconsider, I contacted the listing agent, using a separate email address and the name of an LLC I'd established for personal investments. Very interested in this property. Would like to make an offer before it hits the market officially. The response came within hours. The sellers were amenable to a pre-listing offer if it was competitive. They were downsizing, moving to a luxury condo downtown, and would prefer a clean, quick transaction. Through the LLC, I offered the full asking price with a fast close, no contingencies. The kind of dream offer every seller hopes for. The kind of offer that comes from someone with significant liquid assets and determination. The kind of offer my parents couldn't refuse. Within a week, we were in escrow. I hired a proxy to handle the inspections and paperwork, maintaining my anonymity throughout the process. As far as Richard and Eleanor Chen knew, their beloved home was being purchased by West Summit Investments LLC, not by the daughter they had once discarded. During the 30-day escrow period, I finally agreed to meet my parents for dinner, a closure of sorts before the revelation that would forever alter our relationship. I selected an upscale restaurant downtown, neutral territory where we could maintain the civil facades we'd all become accustomed to. They arrived early, already seated when I walked in. My mother stood immediately, arms outstretched, face lined, with more age than I remembered. My father rose more slowly, expression guarded but hopeful. "Maya," my mother breathed, embracing me before I could decide whether to allow it. She felt smaller than I remembered, frailer somehow. "You look wonderful." "Hello, Mother," I said, returning the hug briefly before extracting myself. "Dad." He nodded, extending his hand formally, which I shook. "You've done well for yourself," he said, the closest thing to praise I'd heard from him in years. We sat, ordered drinks, observed the social niceties of people who were once family now functioning as polite acquaintances. They asked about Connect Me, about the acquisition that had made headlines in the business press. I answered factually, without the emotional detail or inside perspectives I might have shared with actual family. "We always knew you had it in you," my father said after I explained the integration plans with living spaces. "You just needed the right motivation to apply yourself properly." The audacity of his revisionism might have angered me once. Now, it merely confirmed the rightness of my plans. Is that how you remember it? I asked, voice neutral. Because I remember being called worthless on my 26th birthday. I remember being told not to come back until I'd proven my value. My mother flinched visibly. My father's expression hardened, then carefully reset to something more conciliatory. We may have been harsh, he allowed, but look at what you've accomplished since then. Sometimes tough love is necessary to spark greatness. I smiled thinly, taking a sip of my wine. Is that what it was? Tough love? My mother reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. We've missed you terribly, Maya. The house feels so empty without you. We're even selling it, moving downtown, to be closer to, well, everything. I heard, I said, setting down my glass. Congratulations on the sale. I understand it went into escrow quickly. My father nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. Full asking price. No contingencies. Some investment group, probably planning to tear it down and build something larger. It's a prime lot. When do you close? I asked, though I knew the answer precisely. Next week, my mother said. It's bittersweet. So many memories in that house. Yes, I thought. So many memories. The brutal dismissal, the silent complicity, the long years of measuring myself against impossible standards, but also the childhood, bedroom where I'd first learned to code, the quiet corners where I'd dreamed of building something meaningful, the foundation, however painful, of the person I'd become. I have something for you, I said, reaching into my bag. I withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table toward them. A housewarming gift of sorts. My father took it, brow furrowed in confusion. He opened it, pulling out the single sheet. Of paper inside, the deed to their house, transferred from West Summit Investments LLC to Maya Chen, effective upon closing. His expression shifted from confusion to shock, then something unreadable. My mother leaned over, gasping softly as she understood. "You're the buyer?" my father asked, voice unnaturally tight. "You bought our house?" I nodded, maintaining eye contact. I did. But why? To live in it? My mother seemed genuinely bewildered. "You have that beautiful condo on the lake." "No, not to live in," I said simply. "To own it, to know that I could." My father's face darkened with understanding. "This is about that night, about proving some point." "No," I corrected gently. "It's about completing a circle. You told me I was worthless until I proved otherwise. Well, I've proven it, so thoroughly that I can now purchase the very house you removed me from, the house where you delivered that verdict." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Maya, we were wrong. We know that now. We've tried to tell you how proud we are, how sorry—" "I know," I interrupted, softening slightly at her genuine distress. "And I believe you're sorry now. But your apology came after my success, not during my struggle. Your pride is in what I've accomplished, not who I am. That's the difference." My father sat very still, the deed clutched in his hand. For once, he seemed at a loss for words, the carefully constructed narrative of tough love-spurring success collapsing under the weight of my literal ownership of our shared past. "What will you do with it?" he finally asked. I considered the question, though I'd known the answer for years. "I'm donating it to a nonprofit that provides housing and support for young entrepreneurs who've been rejected by their families or support systems. People who have ideas and drive but no safety net. People who've been told they're worthless until proven otherwise." A perfect symmetry. The house that had witnessed my supposed worthlessness would become a haven for others facing similar judgments, a place where value was recognized before success, not after it. My mother began to cry in earnest now, quiet tears that left mascara tracks on her perfectly made-up face. My father stared at the deed, then at me, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman I'd become rather than the daughter who had disappointed him. "You don't need our approval anymore," he said finally, a statement rather than a question. No, I agreed. I don't. But I wanted you to know that the girl you called worthless now owns the house where that judgment was delivered. Not out of spite, but because I promised myself that night that I would someday buy it. It was the goal that kept me going through the darkest times. I stood, placing my napkin beside my barely touched meal. You can stay until the agreed move-out date. The donation won't happen until after that. I just wanted you to know who your buyer really is. As I turned to leave, my father's voice stopped me. Maya. A pause, heavy with unspoken complexities. We were wrong. 3 simple words I'd once longed to hear, delivered years too late to heal the original wound, but perhaps not too late for something new to grow in its scarred soil. I nodded once, acknowledging the admission without accepting it as sufficient. Yes, you were. Enjoy your new condo. Perhaps we can have dinner again sometime. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The house would be mine in a week, the tangible manifestation of a promise I'd made to myself in my darkest moment. But I already possessed what mattered most, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth, measured not by others' standards, but by the life I'd built, the company I'd created, the value I'd generated for users, employees, and soon, for young entrepreneurs who needed the belief I'd once been denied. Sometimes I reflected as I drove toward the lake, toward home. The most powerful triumph isn't proving others wrong. It's proving yourself right. The keys to my parents' house, my house now, felt impossibly heavy in my palm as I stood on the porch, alone in the soft morning light. The movers had finished clearing out my parents' belongings the previous day, leaving behind only the ghosts of memories and the faint imprint of furniture that had stood in the same positions for decades. I hadn't been inside since that rainy birthday night 4 years ago. Now I owned every inch of it, every floorboard that had creaked under my hesitant teenage steps, every wall that had absorbed the silent tensions of family dinners, every window through which I'd gazed while dreaming of escape. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The emptiness was jarring. Without the heavy antique furniture, the formal artwork, the carefully arranged status symbols my parents had collected, the house seemed larger, airier, almost peaceful. Sunlight streamed through uncurtained windows, casting geometric patterns across hardwood floors that had been hidden under Persian rugs throughout my childhood. I moved from room to room, footsteps echoing in the silence. The dining room where my father had delivered his verdict. The kitchen where my mother had watched in complicit silence. The living room with its prominent display of family photos that had never truly reflected our reality. Upstairs, I hesitated outside my old bedroom before pushing the door open. The space was empty now, but I could still see the ghosts of my former life. The desk where I'd first taught myself to code, the bed where I'd lain awake planning escape routes, the closet where I'd hidden tears and ambitions in equal measure. This house had been both prison and launching pad, the pressure cooker that had forged me, for better or worse, into the person I'd become. Now it would serve a different purpose. I pulled out my phone and dialed Zoe. "I'm ready," I said when she answered. "Bring them over." An hour later, a small convoy of cars pulled into the driveway. Zoe emerged from the first, followed by Raj and Marcus. From the others came the renovation team, architects, contractors, designers, all hired to transform my childhood home into something new. "Welcome to Chen House," I said, as they gathered in the empty foyer, voices hushed as if in a museum. Named not for my family, but for what it represents. Transformation through challenge. The lead architect unrolled blueprints on a folding table we'd brought for the purpose. The plan showed the colonial-style home reconfigured into a combination, living and working space for 6 young entrepreneurs at a time. Private bedrooms upstairs, communal workspaces on the main floor, a modern kitchen designed for shared meals and late-night brainstorming sessions. We've preserved the structural integrity while reimagining the function, she explained, pointing to key modifications. Each resident will have privacy, but also community. The balance most early-stage founders struggle to find. I nodded, running my fingers along the blue lines that would redefine this space. And the garden area? She flipped to a different sheet. Converted to a more functional outdoor workspace during good weather, seating areas, Wi-Fi coverage, power outlets integrated into the landscaping, a place to think and create outside four walls. It was perfect, the antithesis of what this house had been. Where there had been rigidity, there would be flexibility. Where there had been isolation, there would be collaboration. Where there had been judgment, there would be support. The first cohort has been selected? I asked, turning to Marcus, who had taken responsibility for the application process. He nodded, pulling up profiles on his tablet. 6 founders, all under 30, all working on projects with social impact potential. All either estranged from family or without traditional support systems. I scrolled through their stories. A woman developing affordable medical devices after being disowned for abandoning medical school. A non-binary person creating accessibility technology after their parents cut them off. A former foster youth, building education software for underserved communities. Each one brilliant, determined, and alone, just as I had been. When can they move in? I asked the contractor. 4 months, he said confidently. We'll work in phases to ensure the essentials are ready first. I handed him the keys. Make it happen. The transformation of the house became my focus during the integration phase of Connect Me into living spaces. While my technical expertise was still needed to ensure our algorithm functioned properly within their larger ecosystem, much of my daily operational role had been absorbed by the parent company. This left me with time and mental space to pour into Chen House, as we'd officially named the incubator. Each design decision became a subtle rewriting of my past. The formal dining room where I'd been deemed worthless was converted into a collaborative workspace with a massive whiteboard wall for brainstorming sessions. The kitchen, once a place of tense silence, was opened up and modernized with 2 cooking stations to encourage communal meals and conversation. My father's home office, with its imposing desk and leather chair, became a wellness room with meditation cushions, soft lighting, and resources for mental health support. My mother's pristine sitting room transformed into a comfortable lounge, with overstuffed furniture and bookshelves filled with both technical resources and literature. And my childhood bedroom, the space where I'd both suffered and dreamed, became the moonshot room, a small conference area dedicated to planning the seemingly impossible. On its wall, I had a quote painted in elegant script. Your worth is inherent, not earned. Your dreams are valid, not pending approval. As the renovation neared completion, I wrestled with a decision I'd been avoiding, whether to tell my parents about the specifics of the transformation. We'd had minimal contact since that dinner where I'd revealed my ownership of their house. A few text messages, a birthday card, nothing substantive. I finally decided that transparency aligned with the mission of Chen House. This wasn't about revenge or even justice anymore. It was about creating meaning from pain, about transformation rather than destruction. I composed a formal invitation to the opening ceremony scheduled for early summer, addressing it to both my parents at their new downtown condo. Along with it, I included a brochure explaining the mission of Chen House and the stories of the 6 founders who would be its first residents. No personal note, no emotional plea, just information and an opportunity to witness what their former home had become. I didn't expect them to attend. The invitation was a courtesy, a final closure of a chapter, not the opening of a new one. I had made peace with the likelihood that my relationship with my parents would remain a civil distance, a cordial acknowledgement of shared history without the intimacy of true family. To my surprise, My mother called the day after receiving the invitation. "This is remarkable, Maya," she said, her voice carrying an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "You're helping young people who remind you of yourself." "Yes," I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral. "People with potential and drive, but without support systems." A pause, heavy with unspoken acknowledgments. "Your father and I would like to attend the opening, if that's acceptable to you." I hadn't prepared for this possibility. "It's a public event," I said carefully. "All are welcome." "I understand if you'd prefer we didn't come," she continued, her voice softer than I remembered. "We've been doing a lot of thinking, Maya. A lot of—" She hesitated. "A lot of reckoning with our failures as parents." The familiar defenses rose in my chest. Skepticism, self-protection, the hard shell I'd grown around the wounded part of me that still longed for their approval. But alongside it came something unexpected. Curiosity. What would it mean to see my parents in this new context, in the transformed space that had once been the battlefield of our relationship? "You can attend," I said finally, "but understand that this day isn't about us or our history. It's about the residents and their futures." "Of course," she agreed quickly. "Thank you, Maya." The opening day of Chen House arrived with perfect, early summer weather. Sunshine warming the newly landscaped gardens. A gentle breeze stirring the leaves of the old maple trees that had stood sentinel over my childhood. We'd kept the ceremony intentionally small. The 6 residents, the board members of the foundation I'd established to oversee the incubator, key team members from Connect Me who had supported the project, and a few local officials whose backing we'd need for future expansions. I stood at the edge of the gathered crowd, watching as people explored the transformed space. The residents, officially Chen Fellows, moved through their new home with expressions of wonder and gratitude. Many had been living in substandard housing while pouring every resource into their startups. Now they had not only beautiful living quarters, but built-in community, mentorship, and a 2-year runway to build their dreams without the constant pressure of basic survival. Zoe appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand. "You did it," she said simply. "You alchemized pain into purpose." I smiled, the metaphor surprisingly apt. It feels right, like this is what the house was always meant to be. "Your parents are here," she noted, nodding toward the entrance where Richard and Eleanor Chen stood hesitantly, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. "Back right corner. They haven't moved since they arrived." I followed her gaze. My father wore a conservative suit, as always, but his posture lacked the commanding presence I associated with him. My mother, elegant in a simple dress, kept one hand on his arm, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. She raised her free hand in a small, uncertain wave. "I should acknowledge them," I said, more to myself than to Zoe. She squeezed my arm. "Only if you want to. This is your victory lap, Maya. You make the rules." I made my way through the gathering, accepting congratulations and answering questions about the program. By the time I reached my parents, the formal ceremony was about to begin. "You came," I said, stopping before them. My mother smiled tentatively. "It's extraordinary what you've done with the house. So much lighter, so much more." "Welcoming?" I supplied when she trailed off. She nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, exactly that." My father cleared his throat. "Impressive use of the space," he said, his default mode of clinical assessment unable to fully mask something else in his voice. Regret, perhaps, or simple recognition. "The structural changes are significant, but respectful of the original. Architecture. Always the practical observer, evaluating the tangible rather than engaging with the emotional undercurrents. Some things hadn't changed. "The ceremony is starting," I said, gesturing toward the front garden where a small podium had been set up. "There are seats near the back if you'd like to stay." They nodded in unison, following me to the gathering. As I made my way to the podium, I felt their eyes on me, witnessing this moment from a perspective I couldn't fully imagine. Parents seeing their child not only succeed beyond their expectations, but transform their former home into a testament to resilience and possibility. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. After introducing the concept of Chen House and the foundation that would support it, I invited each of the residents to speak briefly about their projects and what this opportunity meant to them. Their stories, full of both hardship and hope, resonated through the garden, bringing tears to more than a few eyes. Amara, developing affordable medical diagnostics after being disowned by her surgeon parents, spoke directly to what Chen House represented. Some people are only able to see your worth after others have validated it. But what we're building here proves that worth exists independent of external validation. It's inherent, not assigned. Her words struck me deeply, articulating what had taken me years to understand. My worth had never been determined by my parents' assessment. It had always existed, waiting to be recognized first by myself, then by those who could see me clearly. After the formal presentation, as people mingled and explored the house, I found myself alone in the kitchen, now an airy, communal space bathed in natural light. My fingers traced the edge of the new center island, remembering the small table that had once stood in this space, the site of so many silent, tense meals. Maya. I turned to find my father in the doorway, alone, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. Your mother needed a moment, he explained awkwardly. This is all quite overwhelming for her. I nodded, understanding. For my mother, this house had been her domain, the physical manifestation of the life she'd built. Seeing it transformed must be disorienting, regardless of how she felt about the purpose. My father moved further into the kitchen, looking around with an expression I couldn't quite read. I've been trying to find the right words, he said finally. For today, for everything, really. I waited, giving him space to continue. This man who had always had ready judgments, quick assessments, confident pronouncements, now seemed to struggle with basic expression. I was wrong, he said simply. Not just about you and your potential, about what success means, about what matters. He gestured around the transformed kitchen. This, what you've created here, this is real success. Not just the financial achievement, but the meaning behind it, the impact. I absorbed his words, searching for the familiar anger or hurt they might have once triggered. Instead, I found a quiet acceptance. His recognition mattered, but not in the way it once would have. It was no longer validation I needed, just a truth I already knew being finally acknowledged. Why did you do it? I asked, the question that had lingered since that birthday night. Why tell me I was worthless when you knew how hard I was trying? He flinched visibly at the word, worthless, as if hearing it reflected back made him understand its cruelty in a way he hadn't before. Fear, he admitted after a long pause. Fear that you were wasting your potential. Fear that without the structure and path I understood, you would struggle. Fear that I didn't know how to help you succeed in the world you had chosen. He shook his head slowly. It wasn't about you being worthless. It was about me feeling worthless as a father because I couldn't guide you in a world I didn't understand. The revelation settled between us, neither absolution nor accusation, simply truth. His failure had never been about my worth, but about his own limitations, his inability to see value in paths he hadn't traveled. I understand fear, I said finally. It's what drives most of us, one way or another. But it's a terrible foundation for love. He nodded, eyes suspiciously bright. Your mother and I, we've been doing a lot of thinking. A lot of. He hesitated, the unfamiliar territory of emotional excavation clearly uncomfortable. A lot. Of therapy, actually. This surprised me. My father, the paragon of self-sufficiency, in therapy? The sale of the house, your revelation at dinner, it forced us to confront things we'd been avoiding for years, he continued. Not just about you, but about our marriage, our values, the life we'd built. Whether any of it was truly what we wanted or just what we thought we should want. He looked around the transformed kitchen again. This space, what you've done with it, it's so much better than what we had. More open, more honest, more... He struggled for the word. More alive. For the first time, I saw my father not as the towering judge of my childhood, but as a man with his own fears and limitations, his own regrets and blind spots. Not a villain in my story, but a complex human navigating his own. The residents here, I said, changing direction, they're building things that matter, things that will help people. But many of them have been told, like I was, that their paths aren't valid, that their dreams aren't valuable until proven financially successful. He nodded slowly. I'd like to help, if that's possible. Not financially. I understand you have that covered. But perhaps as a mentor, in areas where my experience might be useful. If that wouldn't be uncomfortable for you. The offer surprised me, not just the practical support, but the implicit acknowledgement that he saw value in what we were building here, in paths different from the one he had walked. I'll consider it, I said honestly. The program is still developing. We're figuring out the right balance of support and independence. A small, sad smile touched his lips, a balance I never quite mastered as a parent. Before I could respond, my mother appeared in the doorway, eyes red-rimmed but composed. Maya, one of the young residents, Amara, I believe, was asking about the garden design. I thought perhaps we could both speak with her, since I know the original plantings and you know the vision for the future. It was an olive branch, small but genuine, a recognition of continuity between past and present, between her domain and mine. I nodded, following her outside where Amara waited by the newly installed garden benches. The three of us walked the grounds together, my mother pointing out which plants were original. These hydrangeas are nearly 30 years old. They bloom beautifully in late summer. While I explained the new additions designed for both beauty and function. As we talked, I watched Amara's face, saw the way she listened intently to both of us, taking notes on her phone about care and maintenance. This bright young woman, rejected by her own family for choosing innovation over tradition, was absorbing knowledge from both my mother and me without sensing the complex history beneath our careful interactions. You know, my mother said thoughtfully as Amara excused herself to join the other residents, I always gardened alone. I never thought to ask if you were interested. I wasn't, really, I admitted. Not then, but I appreciate what you created. Here. We kept as much of the original landscape as possible because it was beautiful and well-designed. She smiled, a genuine expression that softened her features. That means more than you might realize. She hesitated, then added, I'd be happy to consult on the garden maintenance if that would be helpful, for the residents. Another small bridge extended. They would appreciate that, I said. Many of them have been focused on survival, not cultivation. Having someone teach them about creating beauty alongside function would be valuable. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the gathering that filled the transformed space of my childhood home. Young innovators chatting with experienced mentors, former Connect Me colleagues mingling with foundation board members, my father deep in conversation with one of the residents, his expression engaged in a way I rarely remembered seeing in my own interactions with him. We won't ask for forgiveness, my mother said suddenly, her voice soft but clear. That would be selfish, putting the burden on you to absolve us. But I want you to know that we recognize what we did, the harm we caused, and we are deeply, genuinely sorry. I turned to look at her, this woman who had stood silently by while my father delivered his verdict, who had chosen peace over protection more times than I could count. In her eyes, I saw something I'd rarely witnessed: raw honesty, unclouded by social expectations or appearances. "I don't know what relationship is possible for us moving forward," I said truthfully. "But I do know that Chen House isn't about the past. It's about creating a different future for these young founders than the one I experienced. It's about transformation, not retribution." She nodded, understanding the implicit extension. Not forgiveness exactly, but an openness to something new, something yet to be defined. As the evening progressed and guests began to depart, I found myself standing on the front porch, watching as my parents prepared to leave. My father extended his hand formally, which I shook. "Thank you for allowing us to be part of today," he said. "What you've built here, it matters. It's meaningful in a way few things are." My mother stepped forward hesitantly, her hand half raised as if unsure whether to offer a hug. I made the decision for her, stepping forward to embrace her briefly. "The garden consultation offer stands," she whispered, "whenever they're ready to learn." As their car pulled away, I remained on the porch, watching until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Behind me, the house, Chen House now, hummed, with new life, with possibility, with 6 brilliant minds beginning journeys that might change the world in ways none of us could predict. Zoe joined me on the porch, leaning against the railing. "So," she said simply, "how does it feel?" I considered the question, searching for the right words to capture the complex emotions of the day. "Like closing a circle," I said finally, "but also like opening a door." The young entrepreneurs who would live here might never know the full story of this house, how it had witnessed both cruelty and triumph, how it had been both wound and healing. They would only know it as a place of possibility, of support, of inherent worth recognized and celebrated. And perhaps that was the greatest transformation of all, that a space once defined by conditional love and impossible standards would now nurture unconditional belief in human potential. I looked up at the house, at windows now filled with warm light and new faces. The structure remained, its bones recognizable despite the renovations, but its purpose had been utterly reimagined. Like me, it had been deemed one thing and become another entirely. "You know," Zoe said thoughtfully, "most people would have just sold it or demolished it. You transformed it instead." I smiled, the metaphor not lost on me. Some spaces are too important to destroy. Sometimes the most powerful response to pain isn't erasure, but reimagination. As night fell fully, we walked back inside to join the residents who were settling into their new home. In the entryway hung a simple plaque, the only explicit reference to the house's history. "Chen House, where worth is recognized, not assigned. Where value is inherent, not earned. Where the future is limited only by imagination, never by expectation." Standing beneath these words, watching as 6 young innovators began to make this space their own, I felt a profound sense of completion. The wounded girl who had driven away in the rain 4 years ago had not only survived, but had transformed her pain into purpose, her rejection into opportunity for others. My parents' verdict had been wrong. I had never been worthless. None of us are. Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover the one thing that can't be taken away, the inherent value of who we are, not what we achieve. And sometimes, when we build from that foundation, we create something far more meaningful than success. We create significance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.